Welcome, everyone. We are ready for another Friday Forum. And those of you that have joined me throughout the several months that we've been doing this know that this is an opportunity for you to hear from subject matter experts about things that are important to you as a professional, and also to the students and the parents and the colleagues that you work with. And I'm so honored to have some very special guests today with me. I have Dr. Debra Felix, Dr. Monica Randall, and Sydney Montgomery, Esquire, as my guests. So I'm so glad to have all three of you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as you're coming in, we're coming in a little early, and those of you that have attended my Friday forums know I like to know where you're from, and I'd like my guests to know where you're from, who you are, and where you're from. And it's also helpful to each of you to know who's in the audience and such. So as you log in, go ahead and share your name and where you're located. We have people from Colombia, from Africa, from all sorts of places. Looks we've got Chicago, Florida, Kat's here from Bakersfield. I'm always glad to see somebody else from Central Valley. We don't get represented very often. So look at all these: Cypress, Texas, Lexington, Princeton, Sarah's from Denver. Look at all these places. And we had well over 200 people register for today's interview. So you can see that this is a topic about the College Equity Index and where are we at, what needs to be done, and how can we influence that is such an important topic. So, and Temecula, yay, glad to see somebody from Temecula. We've got Johnny from Fresno. So we're all represented all over the world. Now, as you're joining us, make sure your chat box is changed to panelists and attendees, because if you want to, we love to encourage comments. You guys add so much to this. Remember, we also have a podcast audience, so I want to be able to acknowledge that as well. But when you're making comments, make sure it's on panelists and attendees so that other people can see it. So, all right. So thank you again, all three of you, for being here today. I'm just so honored and pleased to have you. And I'm interested, and I'm sure our audience is interested, how did you get into this work of working with students? What was your passion that drove you to do this work? So Sydney, let's start with you. What was your passion, and why did you get into working with students?
Thanks, Sydney. Yeah, so I kind of fell into college counseling accidentally. I was one of the first students from my high school to go to an Ivy League. And as the daughter of military parents and an immigrant mother, my mom immigrated from Jamaica. There was so much that I realized that my school system, which I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, it's a fantastic school system, but there was so much that I didn't know about accessibility and affordability, admissibility, and advocating for yourself. So I am really tied to my community. I went to Clarksburg High School and I started giving back to my community throughout college. And when I got to law school, I just kind of took stock of the fact that, I somehow ended up at Harvard Law School through a series of people really intervening on my behalf. And I wanted to be that intervening force for others and to make it a little less haphazard and more strategic. So I found the UCI certificate program. I found IUCA. I did practice law for a little bit as a family law litigator, but ultimately pivoted to college and law school admissions consulting because I feel like it's really where my heart is and where I can do the most good.
Well, that's great. That's great. What about you, Monica? What influenced you, or what motivated you to start working with students?
So I started out sort of on the other side of the desk, or the other side of the gate, so if you'd like to put it that way. I worked in higher education for a long, long time, and I used to work on a college campus. And during my time on that college campus, I became the interim vice president for enrollment management for some time. So I worked in the president's office. And by chance, of course. I had a lot of traffic, new students coming in, families always coming into my office. And because of that, I always kept a box of tissues on my desk. There were a lot of emotional times when students came in, they weren't quite sure about financial aid, they weren't quite sure about admissions and all of that. So I always had tissue on my desk because sometimes it would get a little emotional. And I remember saying to one of my colleagues, wow, why don't people know this information before they come to us? Why aren't they knowledgeable about financial aid? Why aren't they knowledgeable about the admissions process? Wow, it would be really nice to be able to do this. I didn't know at the time that, yeah, there are groups of people who do this, like us. So I said, wow, it would be great to do this. So that's how I got started. I thought about it from the perspective of, being on the other side of the desk, and also from a parent who eventually will have a student right now working through the process, and how I could give back through helping students and their families before they come to college. So that's how I began my career here.
And how about you, Debra? What was your journey like?
Well, I was a high school science teacher right out of college. And at this point, I've taught at 7 different schools, both here and abroad. But at a certain point, I found myself working in admissions at Columbia. And my husband was getting a PhD at Columbia at the time. And when he finished, he took a postdoc at NIH, and we moved to Maryland, and I left the job. And I started getting phone calls right away from people who wanted to get help with applying to schools like Columbia. And so I just started working on it that way. But I've always been really passionate about developing young people as a teacher, or now as an IEC. So it was a nice fit. And it is nice to jump to the other side of the desk. I mean, when you're an admissions officer at Columbia, you're rejecting almost everyone. And it gets old after a while. And so being on this side where I'm, helping kids just feels a lot better.
So how did each of you find out that this was a profession that you could actually participate in and join?
For me, it was people asked me to do it.
What?
People asked me to do it. That's how I got into it.
How about you, Monica?
So for me, it was when I started, I felt like I needed to belong to an organization primarily for, I knew the admission side, financial aid side, but for the business aspect. So I found out about IECA, joined them, and then did their summer training institute, because I really just felt like, yeah, I have one aspect, but let's learn the business side of it as well. So that's how I did it.
Oh, good. What about you, Sydney? How did you find out?
I really didn't know it was a whole profession until I must have been, I think I was Googling. I like to be trained in whatever I'm doing. And there was a period of time in my life where I wanted to be a wedding planner. And so I had looked up like wedding planner certificates in college. So I knew that there were certificates for different things. And I think I found the UCI certificate program first. I don't think I knew the phrase independent educational consulting, but I found it. And then through that, they were like, oh, there's discounts if you're members of these organizations. And I was like, oh my goodness, there are all these people here. And that's when I really started to think this could be, my career.
That's exciting. That's exciting. And it shows the value and the opportunities that professional organizations offer. And that's one of the things I'm a very strong advocate for several professional organizations. And I belong to IECA, I belong to Hbcus, I belong to NCAG, the National College Advocacy Group, and several other regional and national. So that's one thing we can do. So what is the College Equity Index? You've all worked on this together. How is this index different from other ratings like the US News?
Yeah, so the College Equity Index really synthesizes quantitative and qualitative data about each institution through data collection, analysis, and substantive interviews. It's an attempt to evaluate the access and affordability, but also the diversity, the campus climate, and the outcomes for right now Black students in an easy to digest format. And I would say that the College Equity Index really differs from ratings like US News and other ratings, especially if you look at US News. They use 17 different academic criteria, some of which include reputation, selectivity, alumni giving, and faculty resources. What those rankings completely leave out, however, are the campus climate for students and a really hard look at their diversity numbers and outcomes. I think sometimes when you just look at a school as a whole, like a lot of the rankings do, it can look like a school has fantastic graduation rates and fantastic retention and debt and all of the things that you want to see in a great school, but it overlooks the fact that for a certain subset of students, their reality looks very different. Their graduation rates look very different. The amount that they're taking out in debt, their happiness, their ability to feel fulfilled and to be prepared for the real world is not so. And so this rating system, the equity index, really takes a narrowed in look on how does it affect these particular students and how are you serving or not serving these particular students.
So how did this all start? What was the genesis for the idea that there wasn't enough information and that there's something more was needed? What was the reason for starting?
Well, I'll take that one. Last July, I was working on a college list for a Black student, and it occurred to me that I really didn't know which colleges would be best for him. I really wondered where he would get not only the best education, but also where he would feel safe and supported and developed and valued as a Black student on the campus. And I just didn't know where that would be. So, and this wasn't the first time I had this dilemma, but this time I just decided to search the web and see what I could find before I drafted his list. And all I could find were data on the percentage of Black students at different colleges, maybe the graduation rates. But as Sydney mentioned, sometimes they roll all of the Black students into a larger group of students of color. And I couldn't really figure out what was going on. And I couldn't find any reliable information about the racial or social climate on different campuses. So I decided I really had to just gather this information for myself. And realizing then that I was immediately out of my league, I got in touch with Monica, Dr. Randall, to see if she'd be willing to help me. And we first wanted to just decide which criteria to use to best determine the racial climate on each college campus. And thankfully, Monica didn't tell me where to jump off the pier. She jumped in with both feet and helped me move the project forward. And then as the project grew, we asked Sydney to join us to add another intelligent, objective, fresh perspective to what we were doing. And she's also become an equal partner. I really had no idea what I was getting into, honestly, at the beginning. And I didn't anticipate how much Monica and Sydney would add to this effort, but they're just both incredible, and the reason that it has gotten this far and gone, taken off really.
So you guys saw a need and then you responded to it. So you mentioned doing these different criteria. So tell us a little bit more about what you used and how you used it to create this index.
So first of all, let me just talk about what colleges we included, and then I'll say a little bit about the methodology we used. We decided we couldn't possibly evaluate all 4,000 colleges and universities in the country. So we started small with just the quote, better known private ones, which were those that appeared in both the Fisk Guide to Colleges, the 2021 edition, which the Fisk Guide says are the most selective and interesting colleges, and those deemed America's top colleges by the Alumni Factor, which is a group that used alumni feedback to rank colleges based on 12 different really interesting criteria. Later, we added a few of the historically Black colleges and universities that we thought might be good colleges for Black students. And we eliminated some colleges. We eliminated colleges that had fewer than 3% Black students for a couple of reasons I can go into later if anybody's interested. And then finally, we eliminated colleges for which we couldn't find the data that we needed. And so our methodology consisted of first coming up with the criteria we wanted to measure, and then going in search of existing data that would speak to those criteria. For example, we felt that a college with a larger critical mass of Black students on campus would probably be more comfortable for Black students. So we included the percentage of Black students as one criterion. And that data easily was obtained from the Education Trust. Then in November, serendipitously, the Chronicle of Higher Education published some great new data on faculty and administration diversity, such as the percentage of Black faculty on a campus. And so we purchased that data from them, and that allowed us to add 2 more criteria to our list. In the end, we had 19 criteria. And so we weighted all 19 data points according to our judgment of their importance. Some were weighted more than others, obviously. And then we calculated scores and assigned grades to each college.
Well, that sounds very complex, but it sounds like the thing that you had to do in order to create an actual index. Otherwise, it's just all anecdotal evidence, right? Mm-hmm. And so to take it and quantify it that way and create those weighted numbers and a way to weight it. And so what were some of the things you weighted more than others?
We definitely weighted the diversity more. Yeah. So the percentage of Black students on campus, the percentage of Black faculty, percentage of Black administrators.
Because that's an important aspect of they need to be able to see people like them on campus as not only as classmates, but also in leadership positions as professors, as other instruction and the labs and things like that. So that's interesting that the Chronicle published that. So how many colleges ended up on your list then?
105.
Okay. So what was the most surprising thing that you learned when you did all this? I know I looked it over. It was pretty interesting. It was pretty surprising at some of the things that are in the index, and we can share. Or I can do a screen share so people can see it. But what was the most surprising? Like for Monica, what was the most surprising thing for you?
So for me, 2 things. One was looking at these highly selective schools and seeing such a small number of Black students enrolled. That was surprising. As Deb said, we set that floor at 3%. And the highest number that we had outside of the HBCUs was about 11.6%. That was shocking. That was surprising. The second thing that was really surprising was, as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Reading the stories of students, for me, it was very personal because their stories mirrored my story from many, 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 many years ago as an undergraduate. And what shocked me was that the experiences that so many students are experiencing right now on college campus is no different than my own. The lack of support, the continued microaggressions, things that I experienced. And that it was, at times I had to take a step back reading their stories because it really brought back memories that were not very pleasant. And to think that this is happening today was really shocking. And it was hard for me at times. So that, for me, that's what was the most shocking part of this.
What about for you, Sydney? What was shocking to you?
I think in some way what was shocking to me was how not shocked I was by most of the information that was in the index. I mean, granted, I graduated college 6 years ago, so not that long ago, but I will say that it made me really reflect on my own experiences. I think especially striking is the low percentage of Black faculty and administrators. And when we were reading the Black at data, there was so many incidents of not just microaggressions that professors would make towards students, but also the internalized inferiority and the internalized imposter syndrome from Black students, feeling like this was a place that didn't believe in them, or that they weren't worthy of being there. And I think that a lot of that does stem from not seeing people in power that look like you, and not having advocates for you on campus. And thinking back to even the fact that I did grow up in a multicultural suburb of DC, I can still probably count on one hand the number of Black teachers that I had, and same thing for college and law school. And I think I had stopped expecting to see professors and teachers that looked like me. I just accepted that that wasn't the norm. And so I think going through the index and really taking stock of the effects that not having professors of color, professors that look like you, has on your own self-esteem and worth as a student, it just really made me just think about how we need to be more mindful of that, and we need to do more to change that. And how frustrated I feel that there isn't more of a conversation around it. And so that, I guess, was shocking and not shocking, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, and it sounds like, learning that these students experiences are still very similar. I mean, as you said, Monica, it's like this is still going on, and reflecting back on what some of your experiences might have been. And it's sad to think like we haven't come that much farther, in terms of supporting students of all colors and nations and backgrounds and experience, but especially students of color. So Debra, what about you? What was most surprising for you?
For me, I had no idea so much bad stuff was happening to Black students on our college campuses. I thought it was just shocking. And as a white person, I was also surprised, and I have to say embarrassed and grateful to learn about several behaviors that I didn't really know were considered hurtful, or I didn't really understand the magnitude of these offenses. And to give an example, there were a lot of Instagram posts that said that white people would criticize or comment on a student's hair or hairstyle, like a campus employer refusing to let Black students wear head wraps on the job, or professors touching a student's hair without asking, or a coach who forced an athlete to cut his dreadlocks before the first game. I never knew how annoying or racist that was until I read all the posts. Like Monica, it was also incredibly depressing for me to read the Instagram posts. Most of them were far worse than the hair examples. And I even got to the point where I couldn't read them anymore. And so I got two friends of mine in a nearby town to help me comb through them. It was just emotionally exhausting. And I was very surprised also to find that a large percentage of the microaggressions and the assaults on Black students were perpetrated by their classmates, not administrators, not faculty members, but their own friends, their own classmates. And I was further surprised to find that everyone was doing bad stuff, saying and doing inappropriate things. It was students, faculty, administrators, campus police, visitors, people visiting the campus, prospective students, even people living in the neighborhoods around the college. So, it just infuriated me how much these poor Black students have to put up with. And then finally, about, in doing the index, it surprised me how powerful the qualitative data was, but also how difficult it was to incorporate it into the index. Quantitative data is easy. It's easy to work with. It's universally trusted, but only the qualitative data really deeply reveals what the lived experiences are for these Black students. So it was surprising for me to find how difficult it was to come up with an index that included the actual social and emotional and lived experiences of the students.
So do you think that this is going to be even more important after the pandemic? Is it going to be more pronounced? How do you feel like the pandemic is going to influence this for students going forward?
Influence what?
Like whether students, their social experience and what's going to be a good fit for them. Like they've been home for this year and all of a sudden they're all going to go back to campus, or you've got freshmen that are going to be going on to campus. Has that made it harder for them? And as we have so much social justice, the Black Lives Matter movement, in some ways that's raised the awareness, but in other ways it probably has created more divisions too. So
I think that the pandemic will definitely affect how students are interacting with FIT when it comes to college campuses. I think it's really important to understand the students that we're talking about, right? The Gen Zers. They are already significantly more racially aware and also less politically correct than I would say even as a millennial that we are, and less tolerant, I think, of vague cookie cutter answers without actually any substance, and do like to see campuses that have some action and meat behind what they say that they report. So I think that it would be very helpful for colleges to take this index, and we did break it out actually. We received requests for finer gradations of our ratings. So the new index, which is available on our website, does have 4 subcategories of access and affordability, diversity of students and faculty, campus climate, and outcomes. So you can see not just the overall rating, but also the rating for each of the subcategories. I think it'll be helpful for schools and universities to take stock of that. And when they say they are promoting diversity on their campuses, to actually put action plans in front of that, because I think as students do return from this period of also self introspection, there's a lot of students, especially when you think of students of color, they've been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, whether that's financially or health-wise. They've disproportionately lost relatives and are disproportionately touched by some of the more traumatic experiences happening. And I think it will be even more important that they're at a campus that values them, that sees that their experiences are not the same as maybe their white peers, and is able to support them in a holistic way that's not just paying lip service to their presence on campus.
Yeah. And I think that's the key, right? Is doing more than just paying lip service. How many of the students, especially at these elite schools, felt like they were just tokens, right? Going back to the imposter syndrome. And not only did they feel that, but probably a lot of their friends and peers, as you were saying, Debra, treated them that way too. And like, you're just here because of your color or where you live or both. And that can be quite devastating, and it makes you work. I can't speak from my personal experience because I do have that white privilege. I recognize that, but I was a first generation student whose parents my dad didn't even go to high school, let alone college. So, I always felt like I was proving myself in other ways. So, and then they must feel like they're proving themselves even more. Did you see that as you were going through and looking at this information?
Yeah, we saw that and a lot of other things.
I bet.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stories that really stand out for me were like a student at an Ivy League school, freshman year, he rolls in for the first day of orientation, and he's, unloading his things, and he notices that everyone else is pulling up in these luxury cars and vans, and they have lots of people helping them move the stuff into their rooms and whatnot. And he came from a lower middle class part of St. Louis, and he said, we never had cars like that in my neighborhood. And then one of the white students turns to him and says, are you the help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And another one at a different Ivy League school, same thing. First day of orientation, their kids are moving into their dorm, and his father had gone to park the car and had come back to the dorm, and the boy was going to go down and let him in because obviously the father didn't have an ID to get into the dorm. And while his father was standing in front of the door of the dorm, somebody called security and told them that a suspicious Black man was standing at the door in front of this dorm. And by the time the kid got down there to let his dad in, security was interviewing him, was interrogating him. You know, and just so many stories about kids who felt like they weren't heard. They were told, to your point, that, you know, you must have only gotten in because you're Black. You don't belong here. They're given millions of messages that say you don't belong here.
And even I remember reading, even for students who, I remember one thing we read, and I can't remember what specific school, but the student had on a shirt for this particular school, and she was in the community, and a man came up to her and made some comment, and she said, "Oh yes," she's a Black student. She said, "Oh yes, my father attended, and I'm attending." And this person didn't believe that her father had attended this particular school. So it's those kind of aggressions that even though she was a second generation student at that school, that we read about too. So it wasn't just the first generation. We're talking second generation students who are also feeling those same kind of microaggressions, outside of campus or even on campus as well.
Mm-hmm. So did this change your definition of the best fit college for your Black students?
For me, it didn't. I think it was rather more solidifying, having students really dig in, making sure that they understand and how to take that more holistic approach to students. Mm-hmm. I tend to be very upfront with students when I work with them, Black students or other students of color, because of my own past experiences, and they tend to be very comfortable and upfront with me. So it hasn't changed my definition of best fit. It's more of just making sure that, hey, they understand, and of course they do. I mean, this generation, they're really with it. They understand, what they're going to be up against and what it might be like for them on a particular campus.
Debra, did it serve the goal that you had when you started this then? How did it change your definition of best fit for your students?
I think it doubled down on the importance of the social atmosphere. I always say to kids, we need to look for a school that's a good academic fit, that will be academically challenging, but not crushing, and that has all the extracurricular activities and things like that, study abroad, internships that you want to do. And yes, it's also important that, you would be able to make friends and that you find a good social fit, that you feel comfortable there. And so that third piece, I think, moved up in the list for me, because I just was blown away by how much of an impact the experience can have on a kid if they're in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So we've got lots of comments, and I'm going to come to some of these comments, and I have some questions. We have some questions and answers, and looks like Kat's put in a link to an article that you've written, Sydney. So if those of you that are on the call, if you haven't been checking the comments, there's some really great comments. But one of the questions is did the HBCUs turn out at a higher level on the index? Or were there some surprises there as well?
I mean, I would say, yeah, they definitely did. But I think it was important also when we broke them out into subcategories that you can still critically compare the different HBCUs to each other, especially when we talk about things like, for some of them, access and affordability is a differentiating factor. But overall, yes, they did turn out higher on the index.
Okay. So was there anything surprising to you on the HBCU aspect?
I think surprising would probably not be quite the right word. There's 107 HBCUs, and it's important that they're not a monolith, right? And specifically the index only looks at private colleges. So there's a lot of HBCUs that are not on the list because they are a public college or university. But I think it just increases the need for us to have more conversations about access and affordability. We don't want to send the message that, you don't have to look like all HBCUs will just be better than all predominantly white institutions. That's not the message that we're sending, but that they do a better job in a lot of categories than their predominantly white institution peers. And so I think that is something to be said. And I know that it was asked where you can see the subcategories. The new updated index is on the College Equity First website. If you download the index, it'll send you a confirmation email, you confirm, and then it opens up right into the index. You'll see the overall index grades stay the same, but then you'll see the grades for the different 4 subcategories.
So if we downloaded the previous index, do we get it automatically, or do we need to go back to your website and complete it?
You should go back to the website. It won't. The thing is, it won't subscribe you more than once. If you put your email in and it's already in, then we just have it. But it's actually really good for us to stay in contact with you. That way, if we do have further iterations like this, or, the goals that we're working with in the future, if you want to continue to support our work, the email list is how we will be keeping in contact with you. But we promise we won't spam you.
And how have the colleges responded to the fact that you've created this index? That's one of the questions that some people have had too. Has it been received well? Have people been skeptical? What kind of results
I've heard crickets.
Yeah. The only person that contacted us was someone who worked at this particular school several years ago, and the school did very well. I won't name the school, but the school did fairly well, especially on the diversity. And she was just wanted us to know that, she had worked with the president there when he was there and really paying attention to diversity issues. But that was the only one that I've heard from, which is really amazing.
It's one of the reasons we actually want to have the index for free, is because we do want it to be widely disseminated. And so we are hoping that as this continues to be rolled out and continues to be shared, that more administrators, university presidents, even just admission readers will start to really put this into conversation with their schools. And it's not just hey, you didn't do very well on this index, but maybe your school got a lower grade and there's a school that's not too different from you that got a significantly higher grade. You can see what is that school doing? What are the policies that they have in place? How can you imitate some of those things to increase your, just looking out for, students of color?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the other aspect of it too, right? Is what do you want to accomplish with this? I think that it's great that it's free, and you've put so much time and effort and heart into this. Where do you want to go? Where do you see it going from here?
Well, I can take part of that, and I'd like Sydney to also add something maybe. I mean, we want to, we definitely want to get it to the universities. We want to get it into the hands of the university administrators, and, hopefully it will raise awareness and help them to do better. But we have plans to collect more qualitative data for these 105 private schools and include that. We have a 12-question survey for that already, and we're looking for volunteers, maybe Black college students, maybe someone else, to help us get that survey out and get that data back and incorporate the results from it. After that, we plan to develop a guide that will have 1 page of information for each of the 105 private colleges. And then longer term, we want to produce an index that grades the flagship public universities in each state.
So that was one of the other questions too, was the rationale behind leaving out the public schools. But I know from having worked with data too, you have to draw a line somewhere. You can't do
absolutely.
it. So 100 schools is a lot of data to go through, and so that's it's not you just have to draw lines and somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's exciting to hear. So, and you've already answered part of the questions was of, how often is this going to be updated? What kind of data are you going to use? Because you've just launched this, it is going to be a very agile thing. You're going to be able to adjust it, look at it, and get feedback. So, we just have a few more minutes. And Susan brings up, a good question. So as you've gone through and you've looked at all this information, and also for us as advisors, what can we do? How can we help our students be better prepared? Sometimes we're not aware of those microaggressions, that we may be personally guilty of. And so, how do we help our students to be better prepared? And what are some things that we should be teaching them or building their awareness of? So
I think it's really important that, I'm sorry, and Monica, definitely.
No, go ahead.
I think it's really important that we ourselves are culturally competent. I cannot stress enough the importance of doing the work yourself, especially if you're going to work with students of color, because you can unintentionally perpetuate harms. You can create microaggressions, and you can unintentionally cause students to end up at schools that are either undermatched or not a good fit for them. So I strongly believe that whether you're a school vice counselor, CBO, or independent consultant, you should be trained, whether that is through your professional organization. The American School Counselor Association has a free diversity specialist program right now. There's also some paid programs. The University of North Carolina, Charlotte has a graduate certificate in anti-racism and urban education, which is distance learning. And so you can take that from anywhere. There's also the Institute for Anti-Racist Education, which does trainings for counselors and educators. There are a number of different ways that you can go about starting to do the work yourself, so that you understand the landscape and then can better help your students. I think when we talk about how to talk about race with kids, I know that there are many resources on that very topic, and how, whether you're working with a Black student or a white student, to be honest, you need to help them understand these equity issues before they get to campus, so that they themselves are also culturally competent. I know that we talk a lot about how great Gen Z is, and they are fantastic, but I also really want to stress that attitudes are still learned. So a Gen Z student from a household that has racist attitudes will still be a racist student on campus. I mean, I can tell you, my freshman year, and I know he didn't mean any harm by it, but my roommate was Indian and is a white student, and he said, you girls are you're so beautiful for colored girls, right? He just said, we don't grow up, we didn't have any colored students around us growing up, and you're beautiful for colored girls. And I just remember being like, thank you, or not. I didn't even know how to respond, right? I mean, I was 17. I'd never heard, no one had ever called me colored before. It's like from the 1940s. But that's a person that had still learned that attitude. And there are so many things that people, said to me, even at school. And so I think that we have to do the work as counselors to make sure that if a student is saying something, even like, well, I'm not going to get in because I'm a white male and all the spots are going to go to, Black students, right? That we're challenging those assumptions. Or, if parents have those attitudes, it's about continually working through that. And then also realizing, and I think this helps especially, with white counselors feeling this tension, we are all at once both racist and anti-racist in our thoughts. We perpetuate racist thoughts towards certain policies, even myself, and we are anti-racist in certain areas. It's a continual work. And I think there's this fear of feeling like I'm not racist, so I don't need to do that, or I don't want to be racist. But like, take that word and apply it to your thoughts and your actions and your policies. Is it a policy that is distinguishing among or affecting different groups of people differently based on the color of their skin, or is it a policy that is dismantling that actively? Those are really the two categories. And I think that should help empower you, that you can still be working on certain things while you're also doing good work in other areas.
Thank you, Sydney. That's something we as counselors and advisors just need to take to heart. What would you add, Monica?
You did a great job. I don't know what else to add. I'll just add one thing, a minor thing. On our website, we do have some resources. We're trying to provide resources and guides for counselors, for students. So please check that out. It's under resources in the tab as well.
Yeah, and those are very helpful. Debra, what would you add?
I was just going to say, we also have a list of a few things that colleges and universities can do immediately to make their campuses more friendly and welcoming to Black students. And so that's on the website as well.
And Susan Carr, who I don't know if you've had the privilege of joining, she's on the call today, and I've had her present, and she has talked about, no time for silence and a lot of the issues and challenges and everything that students of color face. So, and that was one of her questions, is do you talk to the schools about mitigating those microaggressions, despite them releasing BLM statements, but they do nothing about or performative activism. So it sounds like those are some conversations you might be able to have in the future.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So it sounds like what we can do, and my audience can do, is we can help spread the word. Let's help get the word out there, help put it on social media, Facebook, other places. We can have a clubhouse discussion about it. Just all those different things so that we can help you bring this out. And if they have questions or other information that they want to receive on the index or about the work that you're doing, what do you want them to do? What do you want our advisors and counselors to do? How do they get a hold of you?
Join the email list. It's my favorite thing to push. But seriously, if you join the email list, which you actually can do just by downloading the index, but there's also a place where you can join if you already did so. That is how we will stay up to date and keep you in the loop with all the things that we're doing. There's an email. You can email us. It's on our website as well, and we would love to continue the conversation with you and help you help others and make the greatest impact for good.
Yeah, you can also go to the website and pose a question. There's a place to contact us.
Yep.
So just do that.
That sounds great. Well, thank you all three for being here today. Appreciate the work that you do and how you're helping your students and helping us help our students and each one of us to build our awareness and help us to be able to contribute in a better way. So thank you. And
thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And thanks everybody for being here today. Come join me in 2 weeks. I'm setting up my interviews for May and June. So be looking for some opportunities for that. I know I'm going to have a couple of consultants who talked about their experiences as men, queer men at the conference. They did this yesterday at the Hbcus conference, and they're going to come and speak in one of my Friday forums. So I already reached out to them to invite them to do that. So Scott and Eric will be doing that. And then I also wanted to mention, if you have an application for one of my coaching groups, turn it in, because my groups are filling up really fast. And I don't want you to be left out. If you haven't gotten an application to one of my coaching groups and you're interested, then go to my website and click on the contact me button under the coaching groups so that you can set up an appointment to meet with me, because my groups are filling up really fast. So we're getting them started in the next week to 2 weeks, and I'm really looking forward to working with everyone. Thank you again, Debra, Monica, and Sydney, and all the work that you're doing. And just let us know however we can help you. Okay.
Thank you. Our
Great.
pleasure.
Thank you.
you.